So here we are at the end of our day, and I was thinking, what can I offer that's going to be of real value? So what I'd like to bring is a resilience practice that you can do in about a minute or two that strengthens your ability to face challenges in your lives, that improves your mood and boosts your energy. How about that? Sounds good? But to get there, it's helped if it's supported by resilience thinking. So that's what I want to talk about, resilience thinking. And I'm going to start with some bad news. According to an editorial in the British Journal of Psychiatry, the lifetime risk of depression in the Western world is now rated as 1 in 2. What that means is that about half of us here today are likely to become depressed at some point in our lives. So I'm thinking there's a kind of line down the middle here. That's probably everyone over on this side. Just imagine that, if everyone over on this side was likely to become depressed. And maybe you think you're on the lucky side over there, but I've got bad news for you too. Because even bigger than the risk of depression is the risk of subclinical depression. That's where it's not so bad perhaps as to get a diagnosis of depression, but you still feel like this. That's me. Feeling blue in a dip. And it's how most of us are likely to feel at some point, at some points. And what I want to look at is what helps us climb out. And that's my job. I teach resilience skills. And I'd like to introduce the idea of a guiding thought. A guiding thought. I've got this thread here. And a guiding thought, it's a thread you follow. And when you follow it, it takes you somewhere different. So I want to offer a guiding thread for when you're in a dip to say to yourself, the natural antidepressant is something that we do. I actually have a little poem I'm going to share with you. It helps me remember when I'm down in a dip, think, what do I need to remember? So here's my poem. The natural antidepressant is something that you do. It helps you climb out the dips when you're feeling blue. How's that? That's my poem. And poems, it's like things that help us remember, things that we draw upon, sayings that we call upon. I want to look at how we do that, and I want to support that guiding thread of an idea with 5 steps of resilience thinking. So, first step is this. It's to ask yourself, what would a story of resilience look like here? You know, maybe you've had a setback, you've been ill, something's gone wrong. Just ask yourself, what would a story of resilience look like here? And stories of resilience have a downslope of the difficulty, but what makes it a story of resilience is there's a response designed to lead to a better than expected outcome. And that's what we're looking at, is how can you have a response that leads to recovery, that leads to regeneration? And I think of stories of resilience, what I say to myself is there's what happens and there's what happens next. And the best way to understand stories of resilience is to identify inspiring examples. So I want to tell you one, as an example I find inspiring. There was a time when all of life on Earth was in danger. Actually happened quite a number of times, and as Kerry was saying earlier today, many people think we're living in one of those times now, but the time that I'm referring to happened 250 million years ago during what we now call the Permian mass extinction event. It's also known as the Great Dying, because over 90% of species living at that time got wiped out, gone, extinct. Okay, there's what happens. Now, what happens next is really extraordinary, because although we hear about the mass extinction events, we don't often hear as much about the mass recovery events. After every mass extinction, and there have been about 5 that we know of, there has been an explosion of creativity of life afterwards. Resilience is a powerful force of nature. You can have a forest that's wiped out in a wildfire and it will grow back again. Now, I mention the mass extinctions because you might think 250 million years ago, what's that got to do with me? Well, you know who was there? Your ancestors. Our ancestors. And if we trace life back, you know, parent, going back and going back, if we go back far enough and we can go back to those mass extinction events, our ancestors lived through every one of them long enough to reproduce. And what they left us a legacy, and it's in our DNA. They left us a legacy of resilience. It's actually hardwired into us. So we tend to take it for granted that when you have a cold, you actually get over it because your body has a natural healing response. When you break a bone, it grows back. You can burn or have your skin cut and it grows back. I can shave off my beard and it grows back. There's tremendous resilience inside, and we often don't tend to assume that it applies to our heart and our mind as well as our bones and our skin. That I don't know if any of you have had a really bad day, you felt really low, you've gone to bed and you slept it through, and then the next day you felt better. That's our natural antidepressant at work. We have a natural healing response. Now you might think, I find that comforting. It's comforting to know that that's happening in the background. But also, it's not always enough. We can have those low dips and we can get stuck in them. And that's why, as well as innate inbuilt resilience, we also need learned resilience. And this, I see, is where there's been a breakthrough in science. I want to show you what I see as one of the most important graphs in psychology. I don't know if any of you studying psychology here have seen this. Here we go. This is a graph from a paper published by a team of psychologists at the University of Pennsylvania over 20 years ago. They taught resilience skills to school-age children, and they had a control group, and so it was just 12 sessions of an hour and a half. Here is 1 year afterwards. 1 year afterwards, the dark line is the depression level in the number of children scoring highly on a depression questionnaire compared with the control group. Here's 2 years later. 2 years later, the group who'd had the resilience training 2 years ago were half as likely to show higher levels of depression. If that was a new pill, we might lightly all be thinking about taking it if it can halve our risk of depression. Now, you might think, well, okay, you know, I can probably see what's this all positive thinking, classes in positive thinking. It's not. It's not positive thinking. What they taught in those resilient classes was something more powerful than positive thinking. It's flexible thinking. And I also want to talk about active hope. I bring the two together. So, okay, in our evolution, we've got a flexible neck. We can look up, we can look down, we can look around, we can even look from unusual angles. We can do the same with our minds. We can look up, that's positive thinking. What's the best that can happen here? And these were questions taught as a perspective check by those psychologists. They asked people to ask 3 questions. What's the best that can happen here? What's the worst that can happen here? That's negative thinking. And then look around and say, what's most likely to happen here? That's realistic thinking. And then if you want to, you can look from an unusual angle, and that's creative thinking. What you're doing with flexible thinking is you're giving yourself maneuverability, the ability to look from different angles. I love positive thinking, but if I went round this like this all the time, I'd be in danger of tripping over things that I might otherwise worry about. Worry can be a way of alerting ourselves as to possible risks. I want to tell you a story about a time when flexible thinking saved my life. I used to work years ago as a medical doctor in hospitals. I trained as a doctor about 30 years ago. And my first few years as a junior doctor, I used to work crazy hours, like really crazy hours. I worked over 135 hours in a week. I worked over 104 hours in a single shift. I had a contract that said I should be available for work for an average of 88 hours. Okay, positive thinking. Look up, what's the best that can happen here? Well, maybe I can change it. So I joined the campaign. I became Dr. Yawn. That's me on the front page of the Daily Star. I started a legal action, and it did eventually win, but it took such a long time that I became more exhausted, more burnt out, more depressed. There was even times where I actually thought about killing myself. These were really, a friend of mine talks about these years as the crying years. It was a really awful time. Positive thinking, go on holiday, catch up on sleep. So I went on holiday and I did catch up on sleep a bit. And you know what happened? I fell asleep driving. After a working week, I'd worked about 112 hours in this week. And I went on holiday to Scotland. I was driving up near the Grampian Mountains. My eyelids felt a little heavy. I opened them and I was on the wrong side of the road with a car speeding towards me. I feared the car went out of control. It crashed into a rock face. I nearly became extinct. My car did. It was a write-off. Now, it's really interesting here because positive thinking, oh, it will be fine. Not going to cut it here. Negative thinking, if I carry on this way, I am going to crash in another way. That's what I thought. I thought that the crash was a mirror of my life, that if you just drive yourself on and on and on and don't stop when you need to, you're going to crash. And what that crash was for me was a wake-up call. And here's a third step. A third step of resilient thinking is to recognize that crisis can be a turning point. But you need to listen to the crisis. You need to listen for what it has to tell you. So my crisis told me, get out, Chris. I handed in my resignation and I did catch up on sleep. And months later, I was feeling a bit better, but not completely. And there's a danger of putting everything down to one cause. You know, my depression, it was all down to my hours, change my hours, catch up on sleep, and I'll be fine. It wasn't enough. It was a step in the right direction, but it wasn't enough. I hear the same a lot with depression. It's all down to, get to the root cause. It's all down to chemical imbalance in the brain or a trauma in early childhood. But the trouble with it's all down to is, if you look at this diagram here, and each square is a cause, which square is the root cause of the circle? It doesn't work. They act together, and that's the way causes work with depression. There's many causes that act together, but the other side of this is that there are many causes of recovery that can also act together. And a diagram that I find immensely helpful here, changed my whole practice of healthcare, is this diagram here, that life is a bit like rowing along in a little boat. And there are times when your boat will crash into a rock like that. And on the whole, when you crash into a rock is a problem. Might be illness, might be depression, might be anything going wrong. You often see someone who knows about that rock. So if you're depressed, you might see a psychologist, really helpful. But they can be a bit like geologists. They know about the rock, and it's only part of the story. The other side of the story is the water level, which is a bit like your inner reserve. And when your water level is low, you're more likely to hit rocks. When your water level is higher, you're more likely to float over rocks you might otherwise crash into. So resilience training is about looking at what pushes your water level up. And a question to ask yourself is, how is my water level doing? That's the step 4. And so 4 groups of upward arrow I teach about in resilience training are strategies. Strategies are things we do. Mindfulness, meditation, exercise, paying attention to diet, building positive relationships. Then there are also strengths, like just acceptance, strengths. The strength of acceptance. What's happening is what's happening. Acceptance. And the strength also of determination, commitment. These are growable things. Resources like inspiring TEDx talks, self-help books, friends that you feel supported by, pets to stroke, places that you feel safe. And then there's insights. Insights are the guiding ideas, the threads you pick up and you follow, and they take you somewhere different. Now, I think of these as a toolkit. I think of it as the resilience toolkit of self-help SSRIs, strategies, strengths, resources, insights. And this is what resilience training is about. It's about developing your toolkit, developing your strategies. And so I'd like to offer one now, and this is really what we're building up to, really. The idea that when you think about antidepressants, there are tablets which have a valuable role. And there are also actions you take. When we talk about the natural antidepressant, you're supporting your natural healing response. And you're doing that with something you do. And a question is, have you taken your natural antidepressants today? And when you say yes, you've taken steps. So I'm going to suggest that we do a natural antidepressant step now. Are you up for that? And, okay, so I don't know if you've heard this saying, sitting is the new smoking. Have you heard that? There's actually risks. If you sit too much in a day, you're more likely to get depressed and diabetes. So here's the first step, is just to take a stand and to swing your arms. So, okay, strategy, standing up. There's what I call the mystery swing factor, is where you swing your arms. And a great resource, in case you haven't got one, is a harmonica. And so here's the harmonica. Great. Okay, so now we've got the insight. This is what to remind yourself of when you're in a dip. And this strategy is called the reggae baseline of resilience. So we go, have we got the beat? Beat is a great resource. Okay. Resilience, resilience. Crisis can be a turning point. Resilience, resilience. Crisis can be a turning point. Active hope. Oh, active hope. Yeah, active hope. Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4. Active hope. 1, 2, 3. The natural antidepressant is something that we do. It helps us climb out the dips, yeah, when we're feeling blue. Thank you.